Okay, hello, and welcome to Enhanced Information Solutions webinar on eDatasheet and the new features for manual data entry into Pi. I'm Jack Body, EIS's Director of Sales and host for today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all registrants. So here's an agenda for today's webinar. Okay, first we will have a poll, followed by an introduction of EIS and today's speaker, and then following up with a demo and next steps. Here's some Zoom basics. Before we get started, if you want to ask a question, you can see this little icon for Q&A. Click on that. You can ask a question. We will try to answer the questions either during the Zoom meeting or afterwards, but we will answer your questions. At the conclusion of the webinar, you will be presented with a survey. Please complete the survey so we can properly gauge the value of this webinar and your opinions. Bryce, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Hello, everybody. Bryce Lawrence. I lead our operational intelligence team, and we're heavily involved in the design and the testing and kind of the voice of the customer for the eDatasheet project that we're going to show today. Nice to see you all.
All right. Thanks. Okay, now we're going to launch a poll here. We're going to share the results. Okay, please answer these questions as you can, and we'll share the results. Thank you. Give you a minute or so to go through this. So here's the results. We have a need for manual entry to Pi. For manual data entry to Pi, everybody. SQL Server, 38%. Something else, 13%. My current manual entry is select all apply. Pi manual logger, 13%. Excel with VBA, 25%. Something else, 50%. And nothing, 38%. Features that are needed for manual entry to Pi, select all that apply. 63% is support asset framework, 50% enforce limits, enforce comments with when limits are violated, 50%, reason code pull down, 25%, qualified reason codes based on selection, 25%, run disconnected, 38%, audit trail, 50%. Our visualization of process data is select all that apply. Pi Vision, everybody. Process book, 25%. Something else, 25%. Okay, thank you for taking the poll. All right. So a little bit about who Enhanced Information Solutions is. We were founded 30 years ago in Stillwater, Minnesota. We do a lot of MES consulting, implementation of Pi implementation services, Pi services, Seek services, OT cybersecurity, and we actually have 3 primary products: eDatasheet for manual data entry into Pi, Ops Tracker with electronic logbooks as workflow and complete audit trail, and Pi Event Frame Manager. We're global. We are global. These are our brick and mortar offices in Stillwater, Minnesota, Toronto, Canada, San Juan, Puerto Rico, Dublin, Ireland, Mannheim, Germany, Pune, India, and Istanbul, Turkey. And we have consultants working globally in many locations here. Bryce, can you talk about the OI expertise?
Certainly. As mentioned, we got kind of started down this road by providing services based around AVEVA Pi, and we aim to provide services really from the instrument all the way up to the ERP, with the idea that we also have the knowledge and the expertise around moving that data securely. So we do have people on our team that focus specifically around industrial networking, cybersecurity as well.
Okay. Thank you. So eDatasheet, a couple of slides on eDatasheet, and we're going to get into a demo. The idea here is that it was a simple, easy to use, intuitive user interface. Okay. The idea here it should be you should require no training at all in order to use it, or very minimal. And it's very familiar, similar to a spreadsheet. So as you'll see here, it should be pretty straightforward. Okay, Bryce, can you talk to the architecture?
Certainly. So the idea behind the architecture is that eDatasheet is one of the Ops Tracker modules, and the Ops Tracker application server then is, or set of servers, is what serves out to both the clients for use and entering data, and also for doing any configuration. And then the Ops Tracker server uses SQL Server on the back end for both storing data that's entered and also storing all configuration. And then the communication to Pi servers and Pi, both data archive and AF servers, is through the PiWave API, with the idea that the Ops Tracker server can connect to as many different Pi servers as required through PiWave API connections that are set up. And we did this on purpose to allow for a distributed architecture. So, within a corporation going through multiple layers on the network, or potentially even allowing users to enter data through eDatasheet outside the corporation, if you've got a PiWave API set up that's external facing. And then all interactions are done through an HTML5 compliant web browser. So that's all that's needed to both configure and enter data.
Okay. All right, Bryce, I'm going to make you the host here.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, my screen showing up?
Yes, sir.
Great. All right, so as I mentioned, eDatasheet is logged in through just all users just use the HTML5 compliant browser. It can be set up so that it is logging in by connection to your Active Directory, so that you can use your standard username, password at a computer. Also, you can set up eDatasheet specific users, which are then stored in the SQL database backend, and you can have a combination of both. Again, the idea here is to allow flexibility so that you can have different users entering potentially data from even different domains. When you do log into eDatasheet or into Ops Tracker, it will present you the plants that are available. Now, plants that are available are set up strictly based on users and groups. So if you only have one plant available, you won't get this selection. But Ops Tracker and eDatasheet are designed to be an enterprise solution so that you can set them up to connect out to multiple plants. And then the other thing that ties to your user is not only the plants that are available to you, but also the language, which is your default language. So in this case, I'm going to simply select the, let's see there you go. Sorry, and my Zoom bar was in my way. So any modules that you have installed on Ops Tracker will show up here. So in this case, we're going to focus on eDatasheet specifically. And as soon as you go into eDatasheet, it's going to ask you to pick the equipment that you want to look at. Now, equipment in this case is a very general term. This is not an S88 or S95 enforced hierarchy. It simply allows you to categorize equipment classes and then categorize forms underneath them. So as you can see here, I've got a couple where, I've got a distillation column and I have multiple columns. I got storage tanks that are multiple. And then one of the things we changed this interface to allow you to put in the description to go along with the equipment. And as you can see, these descriptions can be pretty much as long as you want, and then it'll just take up a little more space here. But then from a user's perspective, you pick which equipment you're going to go into, and then the next piece is picking the form. And then again, we changed this interface to be consistent with the equipment and added additional ability to show the description around the forms themselves to give the operator a little more insight as to what they're picking. Now, of course, these descriptions could be left blank if you don't want to fill in more. Completely up to you, 100% configurable there. So now in this case, the form that I have selected is set up to automatically create entries every 4 hours. We'll go through different ones that do ad hoc, but this one is actually every 4 hours, and then it's also set up to default to go back 24 hours is the starting point. So you can set that up. I could have it default to current time. In this case, I intentionally set up this form to always default to going back to yesterday. So this may be, if it's something where you've taken it on a log somewhere else and then you're entering in the eDatasheet, completely configurable. And actually, as I go through this, everything we talk about is going to be configurable. There's nothing in eDatasheet where you're writing script or using code. So now in this form, what we've set it up is that you cannot add any times. So you see here, this plus sign is grayed out. So I'm not allowed to add any other time entries. I have to stick by the 4 hours. It's showing the time as a 24-hour clock. That's optional to show 24 hours or 12 hours of the AM PM. The other thing that eDatasheet will always do is everything will be displayed to the user in the local time for the computer or tablet that they're running off of. And then obviously everything's saved in UTC time. And on this one, we're actually showing the timestamps by rows with the idea that, excuse me, that you can enter in data. I can hit tab. I can enter in the next one. And then this one is actually set up. So if I do enter data that's outside of range, which I'm not showing, but will show on others, excuse me, it'll not allow me to save it. So if I hit save here, it'll just say, nope. This has to be between 0 and 1. I'm not even going to allow you to make the save at all. And we'll show other options for this. But then once I actually do enter it and I hit the save, now it'll backlit in gray. I'll get a little pop-up to tell me that it was to save successfully, and that meant the data was sent out. Now, for all of these individual tags here that we're displaying, you have the option of sending the data to Pi or not. So data is always saved on the SQL backend, and then on a tag by tag basis, you have the option to send it out to either a Pi tag or an AF attribute, and that AF attribute can be linked to a Pi tag as well. The idea there is to give you that flexibility. So potentially, if you've got some things that aren't actually in Pi yet, but you want to have them on the same sheet, and they just exist in SQL for now, then you have total flexibility there. And also on this form, one other thing is we've set this up so this does not allow any change. So you can see here, regardless of who I'm actually logged in as full admin, and this form simply does not allow me to make any change to data after the data has been saved. So with this, I'm going to switch over to a different set of forms. So I'm going to go to what we'd call an ad hoc form, right? So in here, the times are not predefined. I'm going to go on to our example batch reactor, and we're going to go into this manual additions, the fold, meaning it's got a whole bunch of fields in it. So a couple things different on this now is one of the things we've done is you saw in the previous form, all I showed was the top. I just showed the alias, the tag. I didn't show the limits. This one I am showing the limits. And then also I'm showing here is the description. So if I want more text around this, I can show the description along with the alias. And this description, as I'll show, can be multi-lined. It can have about as much as you want to do in it, and then you can format it. So I can format it if I want it all in one line. I'll show you others where I format it in some multiple lines. Completely up to you. And as you can see on this one now, I'm actually showing the data on an ad hoc view that was added in. It was not automatically created, and I'm allowing 1 month back. So what I'm going to actually do is, if you show here, actually, let's just log out, and I'll log back in as an operator real quick. So I'm going to log in as a different user group. This is an operator. As you can see, there's actually different plants that were available for this operator. So same data is available. So one of the things that's new is we've set it up to allow to have changes and additions going back to X number of days. So in this case, I've said I'm going to allow operators to make changes to data, but only 5 days back. So if I come up here, see, I cannot make any change. But if I come down here, so this was only 4 days ago, I can make a change. So then I'm allowed to change it and save it back out. The other feature that this has, and I'll show as I log in with Supervisor, is you can set up groups that override this. So in this case, I said, well, the operators only can go 5 days back and can make changes, but a supervisor can actually go override that, anybody in a supervisor group, and they can make changes as far back as they want. So the other piece of this too is I actually can't even enter data as an operator. So if I go in and try to just my zoom a little bit so you can see, if I go in and enter data, and if I say I want to do March 12th, I come here, I can't even enter the data at all. So if I say, oh, that was wrong, I actually meant to do, it was today, the 20th, and I want to do what it is an hour ago. Now I can come in and I can actually enter the data.
Hey, Bryce, we have a question here. I think you already addressed this, or you will be shortly here. But can forms be set up to allow for changes to data after it has been saved, preferably by adding a comment and why it has been saved or why it has been changed?
So we don't enforce a comment on changing data. That's actually a good idea. That's a good option that we could add in. But currently, no, it's not enforcing that you enter a comment if you make a change to past data. However, we do have a full audit log. So every time any user logs in and enters any value, which includes changing a value, it tracks not only the timestamp that it's sending the value down to pi and then the value, but it also tracks who the user was and the timestamp of when they entered that value. So, and I'll show that later, but there's a full audit log if you look through a form, and you can see what the original value was, what the value was changed, and who changed it.
Okay, thanks.
And as you can see here, I accidentally typed a number too big. It shows me it's in red. It'll take it right now, not a problem. So I can go ahead and enter, and then I can save this out, and then it'll take it. Now, one of the things you notice is I don't have to enter all the values up front. If I do enter a value that's out of range in this case, and I hit the save, it's going to tell me I do need a comment. So now I do have to come in here and enter a comment. And then it'll save the values out. Now, so the other thing just to keep in mind is I am showing you pre-release software here, so there are going to be a little minor things that hasn't gone through final testing. If you notice, this didn't backlight great, but promise we'll get all that fixed before we release the software. The other thing is here, you see there's already has a comment, and if you look, one of the big changes we made is the ability to track a comment. So in this case, I actually had different users entering in different comments, and it shows both the value when the comment was entered and what the comment was. So you have the ability to go ahead and I can just change the comment each time, and then I can see what it was. Or if I edit this comment here that I just entered, I can actually add to this. And then if you look back at this, you'll see that it'll actually show both. So it tracks both the user, the timestamp that was entered. Now this timestamp here is what is used to send out to the Pi tag. So each comment can be linked to a Pi tab, but it's not a requirement. But if it is linked to a Pi tag, it'll always send whatever the last value is to that timestamp, because it's going to assume that you're going to have a single value in a timestamp for the Pi tag. Okay, so then just to show, I'll go ahead and log in as a supervisor. And you can see when I logged in as a supervisor, it did not ask me for the plant because we set up the supervisor only has access to a single plant. So if I go back here, so now as a supervisor, I've set this supervisor group with the ability to override values further than 5 days back. So I can actually go here, make a change. You can see it February 29th, and then I can hit save. Same thing if I want to add a value here now, I can add a value that's further back. So if I want to add it on the 12th, further back than 5 days. See, then I have that ability to actually enter data in here. And then it just reorders it for me as you set it up. And then another thing on this form, as you see, it was ad hoc. You can give the ability to enter different types of data as well. So obviously these are numbers. You can see they've got a limit. I can have a string here. right? I can have Boolean value, so true or false. We'll get into other drop downs in a little bit here. I can do a timestamp. So essentially it's any pi value, standard pi value that exists for a tag. It can't handle arrays or blobs, but anything you would expect to be able to see in like a Pi Vision display, it'll take that type of value and you can enter it. Okay. So one other thing I didn't mention. So this form is actually set up so that when you do add ad hoc value, it defaults to the current timestamp, and then allows the user to change that. Again, that's an entry on the form configuration itself. You can decide if you want to use that or not. Okay, so I will go ahead and I'm actually going to switch forms here. So now what is different on this one is that the supervisor is set up so a supervisor, as I'm logged in now, can change any value. So you see here, I can go ahead and change it, and then I'm going to just add a row as a supervisor, and I'll do it right now. So here, so you saw a supervisor could change. I could go ahead and enter it, but the way we've set this one up is that if an operator logs in, they're not allowed to make any changes in the past. So as opposed to the other form where even though this is less than 5 days, I still can't make any change. So just kind of showing there's should be about any flexibility you can think of to allow an override group and allow changes back a few days, and however many days back you want, or none at all is the way this one is set up. Okay, so one of the other big features we added was the ability to do hierarchical drop downs. So in this case, I'm going to pick it's a reactor with the idea that I'm tracking on-grade or off-grade products. You can see this defaulted to showing 1 day. Sorry, that's another feature as well. So at the form level, I can define whether I want to show a day. If you remember the last one I just came back from, I actually defaulted to showing an entire month. Completely configurable how you want to do that. Again, the description here. So here's one where you see I'm actually using multiple lines. So that way, if I do even want to essentially have an instruction as part of the description, you can do that as well. And then the way this one is set up is, so if I do add a new row here and I pick a product, and in this case, I'm entering, say, the actual production, and enter if there was any off grade. And then I can pick a reason for the off grade. And then if there's any product loss. And then this is the hierarchical setup. So I've got a product loss by category, subcategory, and reason. So if I pick product loss category 1, it'll immediately tell me, well, these are red because they need to have something. And if I look here now, you can see I've got subcategories 1, 3, 5, and 7. Well, if I change this and say, oh, actually it was category 2 for my product loss, now I look and I've only got categories 2 and 4. So this list is completely dependent upon the list above it. And then you can have this in multiple levels here. So now my reason is based on what I picked on my subcategory. So here you see I have 3 and 4. And if I come back up here and I change this to be subcategory 4. Now, if I come down to my reasons, well, now I have 2, 3, and 4. So you can set up this hierarchical level as many levels deep as you want to. So for example, I could have had it so that based on the product I selected, it changes what's even available for my product loss category, and then again keeps going down the level. There's no limit to the number of levels that you set up here. And it is configured at a form level. So I'm going to actually show this at the configuration level. So here I've logged into the configuration for eDatasheet. Again, this is password protected, right? You assign users and whether or not they're allowed to have configuration rights. And then there's a whole bunch of different keys that you can give to user on what they can change and what they can't. So you can set up quite a few different levels.
Hey, Bryce, before we get into this, there's a couple of questions out here.
Sure.
One is there an option to have the timestamp be based on the date time entered, not an entered time? So in other words, based on the time that you actually hit the enter key, and the idea there that some questions around GMP, you can't change it unless the time, unless there was some hard evidence or a comment.
So the purpose of eDatasheet is to write all these values at whatever timestamp is here, right? So in this case, it's at the the timestamp I pick here. Like I said, we track who entered the value and at what time they entered the value, but the time written out to pi, the whole point of it is really to give everything the exact same timestamp in pi. So when you go look at it, right? Because if we wrote out the individual timestamps in pi, then there'd be no way to look at pi and know how they line up and why they line up. So that's why we pick a timestamp that we're writing out to pi, but then we track the users. And actually, just since we had that question, I can show real quick. So here's the SQL report. It's just set up so I can pick the form, I can pick who did what. So you can see there's these inserts in here, and then here's an update, right? So the antioxidant originally was done at 2:27 p.m. and then it was updated from 97 to 102 at 5:50 p.m. So the timestamp is still 1:30 p.m. that shows up in pi, but the audit log has exactly who entered it and what the value was and the timestamp in which it was entered. Now this audit log is 100% available by SQL. This is just a SQL report that will give you with it. You could pull this value if you wanted to, right? You could pull it out using PyRDBMS and push it down to pi. So there's a lot of choices on what you could do with it because it is in SQL.
So the answer is yes, we can do it, but the natural state of data that goes into pi is the time at which the sample was taken. But we do track the time at which the value was entered. It's in the audit trail, and if you do have a desire to put that into pi, we could use the RDBMS to push that value and that timestamp back to pi.
Correct.
Okay, another question here, and right now we're showing values that we're entering into pi that are pi tags. Can the values be what are the other destinations? Can it be just an AF attribute, or does it have to be a pi tag, or what are the destination endpoints for data?
Yep, these are actually a mixture. So some of these are pi tags, some of these are AF attributes. I can show you where that's defined. We jump over the configuration real quick to show the mapping. So yeah, by definition, it doesn't matter as long as it's available through the PyWeb API, which is essentially everything. So yes, you can enter directly into a tag. You can enter it in an AF attribute that isn't linked to a pi tag. Now, obviously, if you enter it into an AF attribute that is not linked to a pi tag, as soon as you overwrite that value, the last value is gone and there is no history. But you can also have an AF attribute that is linked to a pi tag, so you can reference everything by AF attribute, and then also have it'll store the history in pi as well.
Right. Although
And then there's
those
also a
values would
choice
be,
to not write out at all. So right now, another little thing we're going to fix here, but so these two actually are not writing out to pi tags. These are only saving in SQL.
okay. And one other question is kind of a leading question beyond this is we always show pi and SQL as an endpoint. Can this be used for other, let's say, other historians, let's say something like Canary or Aspen?
So anything that has a REST API, we can work with you to get that so it sends out to that REST API. So it needs to have a API interface that we can talk to, right? So we've got methods for get and put, or whatever their equivalent might be. But the short answer is yes, we can work with you to get it to connect to other systems that have an API available.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Sure. So if I go back on the configuration side of this, so what we're talking about is, again, this is a plant. And if you look in here, this is, oops, I went a little far. If you look at the list item, remember we were talking about product loss categories. So if I look at product loss categories, it shows the, this is the list item itself. And then there's a new tab over here, which is type map. So this type map is where I define the hierarchy itself. So if I go in here, I can edit it. And this is what determines what's available underneath it. So, right, I've got a product loss category. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then under each one of these, I can say, well, okay, so what are the subcategories are allowed? And then each one of those, what are the product loss categories allowed? So to edit this, it's literally, if I come here and say, well, actually, I want 5, 6, and 7, then I click on the edit. Oh, sorry, I hit that was the one level down. If I click on the edit here at the loss category, this shows me what all the available subcategories are. So literally, if I want to say, well, I want to add 6, I can hit add 6 and save it. Sorry, it expands. Yeah, sorry, I forgot where was that. So 3. So here it added 6. And then once I put it under 6, now I can say, well, what reasons are available? And if I want to say, well, actually, it's only 1 and 4, then I can hit the save there. And so now I've got under 3, I've got subcategory 6 is available with reasons 3 and 1 and 4. If I hit save, now I made the change. That's it. So again, the whole design is to make it so this is no code. Now I can add new mappings here as well. So I can have as many as you can think of, right? So what you do is you add the mapping at the top level. So as I mentioned, if I wanted product ID, I could have done it at the product ID and added a mapping here and build all that out and have the loss category underneath that. I can make as many of these as I want. And then what happens is you actually go into the form itself, and this is where you can choose what the mapping is. So if I look in the production tracking, and I look at the equipment tag association, you can see here at the product loss category, I define, I want to use this type map. So again, I can set up multiple type mappings and I can have different forms that use different mappings. And then I define at the form level, okay, so if I use this here, then what's the dependency for the subcategory? You just point it to other ones. Now, I chose to put these in order, you know, top to bottom. Nothing that forces you to do that. Maybe confusing to an operator, but absolutely nothing that forces you to put them in order, and you just map out which one links back to the other. Okay. All right, so that is at this level. So now the other one I'm going to talk about is I'm going to jump over to a different form. And we'll look at the pump statuses. So this one is a little bit different. So what it's doing is it's creating every 8 hours. You notice there's no history view on here. So it's not allowing me to page back and forth. So this would be, if you're thinking more, you want it more of a kiosk mode, you can have it show up. You always want to have the same amount of data on here, right? So this is doing every 8 hours. If I can actually use this drop down if I do want to go back. So if I want to look at the 18th, it'll show me what they were on the 18th, going every 8 hours. Yeah, and then the other thing that's different with this form is if I do have something that's every 8 hours, again, optionally, I can say, well, even though this is every 8 hours, I still want to allow a user to add a new timestamp. And because whatever they happen to go take a reading, out of order, right? So if I do another one on the 18th, and I say I did it 2 hours later, so then I can actually go in here and save a different one. The other thing is, the other option I put on here is you can also allow, if you want the user to be able to change what a time was. So if I say, well, it was supposed to be at 16:00, but it was actually at 12, I can allow this change as well. I'm showing both options on this, but obviously you could do one or the other. But the point of this is showing that, yes, you can have things that you want in a regular interval, but still give the flexibility to either change, you know, to exactly when it happened, or add in if other things were done impromptu. One of the examples on this is like if you use this for doing especially hierarchical shift notes, right? You might have a shift note showing up every 8 hours, but you want to give the operator the ability to add in and shift note at any time. So you can use it for that kind of example as well. Okay, so one other thing. Just to show, so we do absolutely have the ability to embed this on a PyVision screen. So this is just a standard HTML5 control. And I'm going to go ahead and pick 101. I'm going to use the tank monitoring here. So this intentionally is defaulting to the previous day and is showing it one day. If I want to jump to today, I can just hit the today button. And it'll jump up to today. So the idea here is, right, this way, if an operator wants to be able to see other process values, you know, this one's not as interesting, but you could have whatever process values you want, and you want to be able to enter data in at the same time and then see that on your graphic. That way I can enter it, I can save, and it should pop up here in a moment. Yeah, so you see that line change. So again, this is a very simple control. Just allow, only thing you're doing is pointing this out to the URL. You can download this off the Pi website, GitHub. But another way to make it easier for operator to enter data and then marry that with process data. So obviously you could have these data that you're entered tied into AF calculations, show results of that on the page, etc. Okay, I think
Hey,
that's pretty good timing for
right?
jump over to questions.
That's perfect. Yeah, Bryce, we do have a couple questions.
Yep.
One question is we're showing this within Pi Vision. There are other visualization tools out there like IotaView from OSIsoft, Axiom from Canary. Can this be utilized within another one of those type of displays?
Sure. All it needs is a container like this that'll allow you to contain a web page, because it's just HTML5. We've definitely done that with IotaView. But in literally any application, whether it's a visualization tool or not, that supports a web iframe like this will allow you to put eDatasheet in it.
Okay, another question here is what is the roadmap for the application working in disconnected mode? This is needed if the application is used on a rugged and smart tablet on site without doing local gauge while doing local gauge inspections.
Yep, and that's absolutely the roadmap. So what I'm showing here is version 1 hotfix 8, or sorry, version 1.4 hotfix 8. And that's what's scheduled to come out here, I mean, about official release in about 6 weeks. And then the next version is version 2, and that's what we're shooting for at the end of the year. And that's what will allow disconnected. So that'll allow you to, you know, for example, if you go into a control room or something where you have Wi-Fi, you can download the forms onto a tablet, and then you can go outside where you have no Wi-Fi whatsoever, enter all the data into the forms, and you can come back and synchronize it up. So that is the next version, which will be version 2. And that, like I said, is we're targeting for the end of 2024 for that release.
Okay, another question here. Yeah, thanks. By the way, Chris, thanks for that question. That's a popular feature request. Yeah, so we're working very closely with that. You're not the first one to ask for that, but we're working on that. That's perfect. I got a question here from Alex. Is it possible? I'm just going to read this directly here. You know, can this interface be created to only show blank data entry? For example, if being used to transcribe data from a manual batch record or taking values directly from the line, the operator will only be able to enter values related to that batch process and not see data from the previous batches. So in other words, they're only able to see the data that they're putting in.
So it's time-based. So there's a couple of ways to do that. So one would be, for example, if you have different units, right? So say I have different reactors. Well, you could have, obviously, I can have different equipment with a different form, right? For each different reactor. So when you look, you're just looking at a specific one. And then the other part of that is what we can do is we can create rows or columns, depending on how you want to display it, automatically through the Pi RDBMS and push data into eDatasheet. So why I'd say that is what you could do is you could have that create the row that has the batch ID, right? And maybe you put the product name in here, etc. And then the other values that they want to enter would be white, but they can't change the batch ID and the product ID. And then what you can do is actually make this an ad hoc form similar to well, not this one, but like the reactor one, and not give the operator the ability to add any new values, any new rows. So that way, the only thing that would show up on the form would be the batch that got created, through a Pi event frame, right? When the batch ID started, it would create their own eDatasheet, and that's the only thing that would show up there. And then they'd only be able to enter it for that batch, so they wouldn't be able to add anything or create anything new.
Okay, that's clever. That's good. Good. Got a question here. Are there any tools to help if we want to move Pi manual logger routes over to eDatasheet? Can we import forms? Can we import routes, or can we import equipment hierarchies that are stored in Pi manual logger?
So we don't have anything that we're gonna let customers use, but we do have tools for doing that that are not designed to have great user interfaces or anything. But absolutely, if that's a requirement that is part of the setup, we'll absolutely work with you and get that imported, because certainly we don't want you retyping all that stuff that you've already got set up. So yes, we can definitely push that into the SQL backend so that it'll show up, and we'll certainly help you with that and make that happen so you're not re-entering.
Okay, great. Okay, that's it on the questions. We're right here at the top of the hour here, but what I am going to do is ask if everyone can please take the survey at the end of this, and there will be, this will help give us some information to gauge the value of the webinar. And also there's going to be a link to this webinar recording will be emailed to all of the registrants. Also, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to email me directly, jack@eisinc.com. Okay. Thank you again, and please take the survey.
Yes, thank you.